key, or without that mineral, nothing happens. Now I'm going to talk today a little bit about how we can lose that mineral or not have it be effective in our bodies or in plants. Now as we've changed agriculture a lot since, let's say, the 1920s, 1930s. Agriculture has changed a great deal. Think about how it's changed and what we've done. Many of the things that we've done, we've changed tillage practices. When we changed tillage practices, that changed the way microorganisms work in the soil. The microorganisms in the soil, all that biological activity is what feeds the plants that feed us. So we've changed that. The different types of tillage make micronutrients more or less available. Other things that we've changed cropping sequences. We used to do, across the Middle West, we used to do about a 4-crop rotation. We'd have corn, oats, and some type of meadow or pasture. Now we have quite the rotation, still 4 things. It's corn and soybeans and corn. It just is a biculture, I guess you'd say. It's not a monoculture, but it almost is. That has changed the microbial activity in our soil dramatically and in a very negative way. Again, not allowing the micronutrients that we need to get into the crops that we're growing. But in addition to that, we as farmers learned that killing weeds is hard work. And so we look to, I'm going to call it the chemical warfare industry, to find ways of assisting us. And herbicides and various other pesticides were developed. One of the major ones that we're using today that was developed is called Roundup. And I will use Roundup and Glyphosate interchangeably as a way of describing this herbicide. Glyphosate being the active ingredient in Roundup. Roundup was first patented in 1963. It was patented as a biocide, an antibiotic, and as a strong metal chelator. Now, chelation may be a word you're not familiar with. It comes from the Greek word claw, meaning clamp onto. So if you have a mineral, a chelator will clamp onto that mineral and hold it tightly. When it's chelated or clamped onto, it cannot be used by the plant, bacteria, plant, animal, human. It's made unavailable or unuseful for whatever is trying to use that mineral. Okay, so it was invented and first used, well, one of the uses was put the glyphosate into paint. We developed paints that were water soluble so that we could wash our brushes easily, and became very popular. As you remember, those of you who have hair similar to the color of mine will remember that when you open those cans of paint after having used them for a week or two, they were all moldy and smelly and rotten. If you painted your bathroom wall with that paint, what happened? Fungus would grow on the wall. So they put glyphosate into the paint. It's a biocide, an antibiotic, and it would kill anything that started to grow in it. And so, great idea, worked great. They also use it as a chelator in the lab to determine how much of a mineral was in a compound. For example, if you handed me a compound and said, I want to know how much zinc is in that compound. That's kind of hard to tell. So what you would do is put in a fixed or measured amount of this chelator it would grab onto the zinc. Thank you. Got a little bit of a wind problem up here. That'll work. And then you could extrapolate how much zinc was in the compound. So it was a very strong material. It would really clamp onto things and hold it tightly. Okay, so we went through about 10 years of using this product for those uses. Then in 1974, it was repatented as a herbicide. Now it's the same chemical, nothing changed, but it works as a herbicide. And the chelating ability of it is the mode of action of that herbicide. What it does is chelates the minerals in the plant that you're spraying it on. Let's say you're spraying on a pigweed or a lamb's quarter or some foxtail. It chelates the minerals out of that, breaking down the ESBS pathway, the disease-resistant pathway. You're destroying the immune system, let's put it in human terms, you're destroying the immune system of the plant. So disease moves in and kills the plant. You know, when you spray with Roundup, it doesn't just die like in 3 or 4 hours. It takes a period of time to die. It's because what you're doing is weaken the plant, allowing disease to move in and kill the plant. Kind of an interesting concept, but a very effective herbicide. And so we were led to believe it's a very safe herbicide because the moment it touches the ground, it's going to chelate or grab onto the calcium, magnesium, or whatever minerals are in the soil, and there it is. Well, we're going to learn as we go on that wasn't necessarily quite all right. So let's talk about a little bit. We've sprayed Roundup on the soil. What will affect how much of it is kept in the soil? The higher the pH is, the less is going to be kept in the soil. The higher the clay content is, the more will be kept in the soil. How long is it kept in the soil? I've looked at some research data that indicates the half-life is around 22 years. So if you take over a farm today and say, I'm going to go organic, 22 years from now, you'll only have half as much Roundup in it as is in it today. And so I heard that and I was like, okay, I put some Roundup on my farm. I just ruined the farm for the rest of my life. I probably won't live long enough to see that get cleaned up again. Pretty sad. Made me pretty angry. Yeah, you know, pretty upset about that. And so well, maybe that's not quite true. Why would that occur? So I started looking at research papers and I found several studies that showed when you put glyphosate on the ground, the microbial activity in the earth, in the soil, starts breaking it down. The first breakdown product of glyphosate is AMPA, aminomethylphosphonic acid. It is really a nasty poison, and it kills the bacteria that broke it down. So now we have this poison sitting there, the AMPA sitting there, and we come back along as farmers and we put some phosphorus back on the soil, be it commercial fertilizer, animal manures, or just plant residue incorporated back into the soil. Whatever source of phosphorus you use really doesn't matter. What that does is reacts with the AMPA, reforms glyphosate. Now I got trying to figure out why it stays around so long. You break it down and it reforms. You break it down and it reforms. Well, the AMPA will eventually break down, and it breaks down into another really nice chemical, formaldehyde. If you're familiar with formaldehyde, it's used in embalming fluid. In laboratories, we use it to preserve specimens for years and years and years because it kills everything. So when we're innocently spraying some Roundup on a weed, think about what's happening. You're putting a product on that the plant does not break down. Soil microbiology has trouble breaking it down. When it does, it forms an even more severe poison, and eventually formaldehyde. It's kind of a nasty product. Not quite what we were led to believe. So, what things do we know about glyphosate? Well, number one, we know that it is a broad-spectrum herbicide. It works on about all weeds. It accumulates in plant tissues in the plant. It accumulates in the roots, root tips, shoot tips, and the reproductive tissues. Of plants that you eat, what part of the plants do you typically eat? And the reproductive tissue, the grain. So that's a place where glyphosate accumulates. Okay, I talked about it makes plants more susceptible to disease. That's the mode of action of how it kills. It kills soil-borne organisms. It kills some of them. It enhances fusarium and kills bacteria, particularly beneficial bacteria like nitrogen-fixing bacteria and Pseudomonas. Pseudomonas are bacteria that kill off the fungi that cause disease like stalk rot, root rot, and those kinds of problems. And it kills, like I said, the nitrogen-fixing bacteria, the rhizobium on your soybeans. Other nitrogen-fixing bacteria in the soil are killed. Kills mycorrhizae. So really kind of a nasty. So when you spray it on the plant, it's translocated down through the plant, down through the stem, into the roots, and is exuded out of the roots into the soil, affecting the mycorrhizae that are feeding that plant. The microbial activity that's surrounding that root and feeding it is destroyed from that. Okay? So I thought, well, okay, that's interesting. I see all this scientific stuff and I read these papers and they tell me that. Is there a way I can test that? And I found that if you take soil, sterilize it, cook it in the oven or autoclave, sterilize it, plant your plant in it, and it'll grow up. Take regular normal soil, not sterilized, plant your plant in it, grow it up, spray them both with Roundup. What happens? The plant in the sterilized soil is stunted a little bit from the Roundup. Remember, it's chelating out some of the minerals. But the plant that was in regular normal soil is dead. Disease killed it. Just like you're giving plant AIDS. Makes it very susceptible to any disease that comes along. So yes, I could prove it with a very simple experiment in my own backyard. Okay, what is the effect of this chelation? Just how much does it take out of the plant? Acker et al. In 2006 did some research where he used 1/40th of the recommended rate of Roundup. To give you an idea of what 1/40th of the rate would be, it's about what would drift in the wind if you were spraying a field. So if you have a guy spraying a field over here, your field is over here, it's about what would drift in the wind over to your field. What he found was it reduced iron, manganese, and zinc uptake. It reduced iron uptake by about a half, manganese uptake by about 85%, and zinc uptake by about 15%. Then he said, okay, once it's in the root, will it translocate itself back up to the shoot, the growing point of the plant? We have a little competition here. And he found that for iron, it prevented 85% of the iron from moving up to the leaf. About 95% of the manganese and 85% of the zinc. So very, very strong impact from a very, very small amount of glyphosate. Okay, what is there about the GMO plant, the Roundup Ready plant, and this Roundup system, a glyphosate system, that's different from other herbicides that we use? They're all herbicides are chelators. Nearly all of them are chelators. But when you put on other herbicides, they break down in the plant. So that if you're spraying a herbicide on corn to kill broadleaf weeds, the weeds die. Corn doesn't die because it has the ability to break down whatever chemical it is that you put on it. There is nothing in any plant, Roundup Ready or not, that breaks down or affects the decomposition of Roundup. So that makes it a lot more dangerous than herbicides that the plant can break down. I also looked at how much effect are we having on the microbial activity. I told you that some of the fusariums, some of the fungal disease organisms are increasing. I saw research data that indicated it didn't double or triple the amount of fusarium in the soil. It increased it by 15 times. That's a huge amount. We see a lot more stalk rot, a lot more yield loss due to fungal diseases like Pythium and Phytophthora. But more importantly, this increase in fusariums puts more mycotoxins into the food supply. That is very, very serious impact. We're picking up huge amounts of zealuone, down, NIV. All of these are contaminating our food supply. And we say, well, that's only if you're using moldy grain. So we did some research, looked into that, and found no, that's not true. If it attacks the root of the plant, the fusarium is into the root of the plant and moves no further, you still get zealuone in the grains. So the mycotoxins move through the plant even though the disease did not. So you could be looking at perfectly clean, beautiful grains that could be contaminated with mycotoxins or aflatoxins. Okay, what are some of the other impacts? Well, one of the things that I've noticed is that when you apply higher and higher levels of glyphosate, the amino acid production of the plant goes down. The CO2 absorption, that's what makes the plant grow. It's taking carbon dioxide out of the air. Goes down. Goes down pretty dramatically. And it doesn't appear to matter whether you use a half rate or full rate, it still continues to drop dramatically. One of the big things that we found is that a Roundup Ready plant will use twice as much water to produce the same amount of dry matter. That's huge. Particularly last year, we experienced quite a drought in the Midwest, and we're experiencing another one right now. And so when you have plants in the field using twice as much water, the drought has twice as much impact. So again, a very serious impact. Another thing that it has done, and I talked to you earlier about this, that it weakens the plant, making it more susceptible to disease. Diseases like Cornosporia root rot. I guess I read about it in a textbook in school one time. It's that unknown of disease. It's now the leading disease in Brazil since they started using glyphosate herbicides. You took a disease that didn't mean hardly anything, is now the major killer of soybeans in Brazil. Another bad one that it's kind of raising its ugly head is sudden death syndrome in soybeans. We're seeing a lot of sudden death syndrome in Iowa. We're seeing all across the Middle West. And I've noted, it's quite obvious, if you have a field that you, let's say you had an 80-acre field, and about half of it had a bit of a weed problem. So you went in with a burn down of glyphosate, sprayed Roundup on about half of it, got rid of those weeds. The other half didn't have hardly any weeds, so no problem, you didn't do anything. Late in the season, after planting soybeans in that field, late in the season, the area that you sprayed Roundup on will be dead from sudden death syndrome. The other part of the field, perfectly green. I saw a field where the guy sprayed, he sprayed all the way down a whole mile-long field, and every highline pole, he went out around with a sprayer. He didn't want to hit his boom on the pole, so he went out around. And those were the only green beans in that field. All the rest were dead with sudden death syndrome. Goss's wilt is a bacterial disease of corn. Back in 1970, 71, I started out as a corn breeder. It was a serious disease located in a few counties in Nebraska. By 1980, it was a serious disease located in a few counties in Nebraska. About 4 years ago, all of a sudden, it swept across our whole country and up into Canada. What changed? Well, a dramatic increase in the use of glyphosate. And there's a direct association. I'm going to talk a little bit more about that in a little bit. Other things that I'm seeing, a lot of people are complaining about the seed that they're planting. Doesn't seem to have the vigor that it used to have. I'm not getting quite the stand. It doesn't grow pop out of the ground quite as fast. Just doesn't have the vigor. It's because this seed is being produced on soils that have glyphosate in them. It's chelating the minerals out of that seed, and it just doesn't have the food to make that growth spurt when it germinates. So it affects the start of a crop. And it's sort of like you're used to raising pigs, and you get a runt pig. It's a runt pig the rest of your life. It just never quite gets any better. Well, the same way with corn plants, with wheat plants, with barley plants. If that seed is stunted early in its life, it never can perform to its top level. Some other diseases that are shown up that I never ever expected to see. For example, in alfalfa. Alfalfa has been pretty much a disease-free plant. It's a marvelous plant. It produces a lot of protein for feeding our livestock, high yielding. You really don't have to spray pesticides on it. Just a pretty, by and large, healthy plant. Well, what did we do? We developed Roundup Ready alfalfa. The moment that we did that, we now have a disease called bacterial wilt. It's caused by Clavibacter insidiosus. It's the same Clavibacter that causes Goss's wilt in corn. So here we had a crop that was really healthy. And now we have one that gets sick really easy. And that has a major, major impact worldwide if we're losing that. And I farm a little bit, and I have some organic ground, and I use alfalfa every once in a while to clean it up. My field's starting to get a little bit weedy, and I feel a little uneasy about the weed pressure. I'll put 2 or 3 years of alfalfa, and gets rid of the weeds. Why then did we need to convert a crop that I could use for weed control, convert it to a Roundup Ready so we could spray a herbicide on it? It baffles me. Other crops that are being affected, wheat, barley, head blight, take-all disease. were virtually non-existent. And now they're back with a vengeance when Roundup is used on the soil. You say, well, these are not Roundup ready crops. Why would you use Roundup? Roundup is used generally twice. It's sprayed as a burn down in the spring, kill off the weeds, plant the wheat, get this take-all taken over. But the one that's really scary is that a lot of people in the wheat-producing regions are spraying Roundup on the wheat so that it will dry uniformly, and they can harvest it uniformly dry. That is spraying that product directly on the grain that you're going to grind and eat. You get that into your system. Back on the alfalfa, just to give you an idea of what the impact of Roundup Ready alfalfa. Here is a trial. It's third year alfalfa, second cutting. Glyphosate, Roundup was applied once the year before. They reduced nitrogen by 13%, phosphorus 15%, potassium 46%, magnesium 26%, sulfur 52%, boron 18%, copper 20%. Those are huge reductions in minerals just for the ease of spraying a herbicide on an alfalfa crop that really doesn't need a herbicide. I want to switch gears a little bit. I've talked about the impact that glyphosate has on our crops and the impact that it has on the soil. And I want to talk a little bit about food and feed safety concerns. I talked about earlier about the increase in mycotoxins. We're seeing dramatic increases in these mycotoxins in our food. I talked with a doctor a couple of weeks ago that decided that he was seeing way too much mycotoxin problems in his patients, and he decided to check that out. So he went into the grocery store and he bought a package of every cereal that was offered in that store and then screened it for mycotoxin. What percentage do you think of those cereals turned up with mycotoxin in it? It's an easy number. 100%. That in itself is scary enough. Another issue that's occurring with the GMOs that worries me a great deal. I'm a geneticist. I was trained as a geneticist. I have my PhD in quantitative genetics. And that's gene flow. We're seeing genes moving now from one species to another. And so, well, that doesn't mean much to me. Well, I look at you, I'll pick a woman here in the audience and say, how would you like to have your baby have some pig genes in it? Not too cool. Not at all. What is happening is that when we eat some of the GMO products, say the BT gene goes into our stomach. Okay? These are corn chips made out of BT corn. That BT gene goes into your stomach. There are immunoglobulins in your stomach that recognize that as a foreign protein. And it captures it and passes it out onto the intestinal tract. Okay, you got rid of that. Bad nasty. But he says, you know, those corn chips weren't too bad. A couple more wouldn't be too bad. So you eat some more. You overwhelm that system, and that BT protein moves into your small intestine, where it's absorbed into your bloodstream. Your immune system immediately recognizes that as a foreign protein. It says, I don't need that. That's bad. Let's get rid of it. Captures that and passes that out through the kidney. So your urine expels some of that bad protein. Okay, so you're looking pretty good. But a couple more chips wouldn't be all that bad. So you have a few more, and you overwhelm that system, and that Bt protein becomes a protein in the cell of your body, whether it's in skin or an internal organ or bone tissue. It becomes a part of you. However, your immune system doesn't give up. It's still looking for this bad guy, and it recognizes that foreign protein, captures it. When it's capturing it, that causes inflammation and causes what we call an autoimmune disease. And so we're seeing a dramatic rise in autoimmune problems. Probably one of the worst would be arthritis. It's an autoimmune disease where your body is attacking itself. So we see some issues with that. We see lupus. We see sarcoidosis, where your body produces sarcoids when you're exposed to molds or to chemicals. I have used chemicals before in my life because I farm. And so I have taken those in, and I was diagnosed in the Mayo Clinic in Rochester, Minnesota with sarcoidosis, which affected my lungs, my lymph system. So I'm living what I'm talking about. And it's not fun. Because once your body starts attacking itself, it's real difficult to stop it. I listened to Rachel Weaver's presentation last night. She talked about this and addressed it. And there are things that we can do to improve and slow it down. But once you trigger it, it's pretty tough to deal with. So we got to watch this gene flow, because we're getting gene flow from the bacteria that's in our stomachs, that's in our intestines. We need those to live. And we put other bacterial genes, like the Bt gene in, that moves into that bacteria, and you form a new bacteria that's never ever been seen before on Earth, right in your own stomach. You're generating something brand new that's never been seen before on Earth. And we have no idea what impact that will have. You may have heard the story of Pandora's box. That's opening Pandora's box in a big way. There's a lot of other issues, direct toxicity of the glyphosate. It's affecting our endocrine system, messing up. I'm seeing in our society a lot of problems in the youth trying to decide whether they are a boy or a girl. That shouldn't be. But it's messing up the endocrine system. We're getting huge shots of estrogen into some of the boys, and they get a little bit confused of whether they're a boy or a girl. Not a good thing. We're seeing a lot of birth defects. We're seeing a lot of difficulty in establishing a pregnancy. And I'm going to talk a lot more about that. And a lot of allergies. A lot of allergies in young people. Much increase in that. My daughter's a pediatrician in Chicago, and she said that she is seeing an increasing number of babies born with brain cancer. That should not happen. That should not happen. Why is it? It's because these proteins are crossing the placental membrane, getting into the baby's blood, and so whatever the mother is eating is now in that baby's blood. So they're vicious. Another thing that I have seen that is causing some issues is the stomach and intestinal irritation, the irritable bowel syndrome, the inflammation of the stomach, over and above ulcered stomachs. This is an irritation that is, I see it in animals. A lot of the hogs that we post that die in these confinement systems, their stomachs are just bright red, totally inflamed. I used to load hogs It was always a job to chase the hog out of a pen, down an alleyway, and onto a truck, because they really didn't like the idea of going up a ramp and into a strange area. So it was kind of hard work, but not difficult. Now it's flat out dangerous. I will not even load. I'm just not agile enough to get out of their way. They're angry. Their stomach hurts. They're angry, and they will turn on you, just viciously turn on you in these confinement systems when you're trying to load them. I've had two of my friends, one friend seriously hurt, another killed. The one that died had his dairy cows turn on him and trample them. My friend that was seriously injured had his beef cattle do the same thing. Just turned on him and they just trampled him. Now these dairy cows, this dairyman would work with these cows all the time. They were gentle. They knew him. They were gentle. But he took them off feed. They were dry cows, and put them on some GMO feed. And their stomachs became so irritated they couldn't think straight. I guess would be a good way to describe it. And they just stampeded over and killed him. So some negative things there. I visited a packing plant and looked at some of the beef that was being butchered. I have some pictures up here if you want to come up and see it. But the tallow on a calf that was 1.5 years old was so yellow it looked as if it were a 9-year-old cow. Just amazing the impact the GMO feed has had on it. And if you don't think animals can't tell the difference, you're really wrong. I had a friend, Gilbert Hostetler, maybe some of you know him. He works with Prairie Hybrid. His son was going to do a science project, and so he collected some ears from a GMO corn and some from a non-GMO corn, and he's going to do the science project in the winter. They picked them in the fall, and he put them under his father's desk in the office. The secretary decided that didn't look very neat, so she carried him out to the shop. The guys said they didn't want him in the shop because it was attracting mice, so they set him out in a shed. Well, it did attract the mice. The mice consumed every single kernel on the ears of the non-GMO. They chewed into the bag, but didn't eat a single kernel of the GMO corn. I know on my own farm, I have my rows of corn kind of run into my neighbor's rows of corn. I have non-GMO, he has GMO. The deer eat mine right up to his. So it's really easy to tell where his farm starts. He's got corn and I don't. But the deer can tell, the mice can tell. How come we can't tell? Kind of scary. But to go even further, I saw a report online from Germany showing Dr. Kruger found Clostridium botulinum in the dairy cows. Now, I don't know how many of you are familiar with botulism. It's the strongest neurotoxin known to man. It's used in chemical warfare, biological warfare. It's really, really nasty, and it makes you really, really sick to the point of death. I was in Maine last winter speaking, like as I'm doing here today. After my presentation, I had a farmer come up to me and said, how long are you going to be around? I said, oh, another day. He said, well, could you come to my farm? I want to show you my cows. I'm worried about them. So we went out to his farm, and after talking with him some time, he finally felt comfortable enough to let me into his barn. And I was, whoa. I saw like 3 cows that had Clostridium botulinum. I said, this cow, and this cow over here probably will die within the week. They're going to get really thin, they're going to have diarrhea, they won't eat. And then you're going to say, oh, I think this one's getting better. He's going to start eating and clean up all of his feed. The day after it does that, you'll find it dead in the stanchion. He looked at me and said, no, you're right. That happened last week. What's going on? So I explained to him what that was. And I said it occurs because of glyphosate. Glyphosate in the stomach kills the Enterococcus faecalis bacteria that keeps Clostridium from growing in your stomach. All of us have it in our stomach. It's in the soil. It's everywhere. But we have this good bacteria that keeps it under control. I said, so you picked up some glyphosate in these cows, and that's killed the good bacteria and allowed this Clostridium to expand and grow, and it's now killing the cows. I said, more importantly, you need to be really careful because it will kill you as well, your exposure to these cows. And the guy's standing there looking at me. He started crying. Now, a tough old Maine dairy farmer doesn't cry. It just doesn't happen. And I'm thinking he's really feeling bad that he's losing his cow herd because they get pretty attached to the cows. He said, my grandson is laying in the hospital dying. He said, I don't know what's wrong. And I was like, whoa. He said, what you need to do, you don't need to be standing here listening to me. You need to get in the car, get to the hospital, and tell them to screen that baby for Clostridium botulinum. They did. I got an email from him a couple weeks later, and the baby survived. 3 weeks ago, I had the same thing occur in a town just south of Des Moines, Iowa. A baby drinking milk from a cow herd that was contaminated had this issue. The doctors don't think about it. I mean, that is so rare. Why would you think about it? But once you know that this antibiotic we call Roundup and what it will do to you, then you pretty well can understand it. One of the things that is happening with this is it's sort of a sneaky thing, because what it does is it chelates the minerals out of your body and disrupts the whole system. So you don't have necessarily a direct effect. Direct effects of glyphosate are also a problem. If you have a 0.5 part per million of glyphosate, your endocrine system will be totally disrupted. If you have, for example, 1 part per million, your aromatase enzymes will quit functioning. If you have 2 parts per million, you'll have DNA damage. At 10 parts per million, you'll have total cell death. Glyphosate is the favorite method of suicide in Asia. So it is a very poisonous thing. You say, okay, 10 parts per million, 0.5 part per million, I don't know what these numbers really mean. The USDA has approved a level of 200 parts per million in our food as being safe. And I'm telling you that 10 parts per million will cause total cell death. So you want to be careful of how much you eat of that. Samples of human urine that have been taken in cities, 4 different cities, they found in males 10 parts per million, 16 parts per million, 60 parts per million, 23 parts per million. In females, 6 parts, 2 parts, 8 parts, 13 parts. Really high levels. These are city dwellers who would not be exposed to spraying or doing anything like that. It's just coming out of their food. The question to ask, well, why are the females so much lower than the males? They went back and interviewed all of the males and all the females, and they determined that the males were more prone to drinking beer. The barley was contaminated with glyphosate, and they were getting more glyphosate into their system. So, an interesting thing. I looked at another study with celiac disease, and this is coming out of Canada, and there is a direct correlation between the increased use of glyphosate and the increased celiac disease in children. I don't know if it's related, but the two charts look exactly the same. It would make one think that that is what's going on. I'm seeing an increased disease incidence in the following diseases: allergies, including asthma, Alzheimer's, arthritis, dermatitis, autism, autoimmune diseases of all kinds, bipolar problems, birth defects, bloating, bowel disease, some cancers, celiac disease, chronic fatigue syndrome, that's the Clostridium botulinum, colitis, Crohn's disease, dementia, diabetes, diarrhea, gluten intolerance, indigestion, infertility, that one's huge, inflammatory bowel disease, irritable bowel, leaky gut, liver abnormalities, miscarriage, Morgellons disease, MS, multiple sclerosis, obesity, pancreatic abnormalities and pancreatic cancer, and sudden death in infants. All of those are dramatically increasing. And they appear to be associated in some way or another, either directly or indirectly, most of them indirectly, to glyphosate. There is a recent study just published that's created a lot of excitement, created quite a battle actually, because the companies that have been selling glyphosate or Roundup have said, well, we ran these mouse studies and we saw no problems. They only ran them for a short period of time. People now have gone in and rerun the study for a lengthened period of time, and they found that Roundup caused 50% of the males and 70% of the females to die prematurely. They found no tumors in the first 4 months, but nearly all of them had tumors in 23 months. The males had severe kidney and skin tumors, and all had genetic or digestive disorders. A new study that's really stirred up the industry. I looked at cancers, and in the U.S., most cancers have reduced, some dramatically. Those that have reduced would be uterine cancer, pancreatic cancer, lymphoma, throat cancers, prostate cancers. All of these are reduced, some of them quite dramatically. However, some have increased quite dramatically. Liver cancer is way up, thyroid cancer is up, melanoma, the skin is up, kidney cancer is increased, testicular cancer is increased, breast cancer is increased. What are the target tissues in a human for glyphosate? The liver, kidney, testicle, hormonal system, bone, thyroid. Direct correlation between those. Why has all this happened? I mean, we're supposed to have the safest food supply in the world for the United States. And what I just said sounds like we got the most dangerous. Why is that happening? we have allowed in our regulatory agencies that look at food to use the word substantially equivalent. So GMOs are substantially equivalent to non-GMOs. What does that mean? Well, it means they're almost the same. Almost the same doesn't cut it when you're talking about little things like cancer, malnutrition. That's not substantially equivalent. But because it's been labeled as substantially equivalent, no one is looking. No research is being done, or very little, until you start hearing about some of the things that I've talked to you about. And when you look at some of the results, if you listen to Tom Aldridge's talk this morning, he said, well, research shows that 3/4 or nearly all, 90%, showed no problem in this study. Well, what about the other 10% or 20%? If you're the 10%, it's a big deal. You're the one that dies. You're the one that gets sick. You're the one that has the pain. We need to look at this over a period of time. Now, our animals don't live very long. We generally butcher them and use them as food. But as humans, we live a long lifespan, so little increments over a long time can be very serious. So you have to look at long-term implications of these things. What I see as a scientist is that we fail to honor the scientific principle. The truth and ethics and some of these things have kind of gone out the window because of greed. And I associate and see scientists in respected universities that have lost their state funding, their tax funding. So the only funding that they're receiving is from commercial enterprises, and the research that they do wouldn't dare show very negatively towards that mouth or that hand that's feeding their mouth. So they don't talk about it or don't do research in that area. And so we're limiting our research. But those two things, I think greed and the change of the word substantially equivalent, is really affecting the health of our nation and of the world. And I really hope that you picked up a little piece of something today that will keep you from adding to that problem. Because all of us have a responsibility for taking care of our fellow man. I'm a farmer. I produce food. It's going to be eaten by a lot of you. I want it to be safe. I want it to be good. That's very important to me. It should be important to you. I like to end with a quote from Don Huber. Don is a professor emeritus from Purdue University that studied and looked at this chelating effect of glyphosate. And his quote, he says, future historians may well look back and write about our time, not about how many pounds of pesticide we did or did not apply, but how willing we were to sacrifice our children and jeopardize future generations with this massive experiment we call genetic engineering that is based on false promises, flawed science, just to benefit the bottom line of commercial enterprise. I was looking through the magazine while I was waiting on the plane to come out here, and I saw an ad for Roundup. I have a copy of it here. It shows a picture of a Roundup jug, and it's in a box, and there's 3 jugs in the box, and on the side of the box it says, "The ultimate killing machine," and it shows a sprayer. Well, Monsanto was punished severely in courts in France for false advertising. So they are not false advertising now. The ultimate killing machine, Roundup. The implication is that it kills the weeds, but you cannot get them for false advertising. With that, I will stop and entertain any questions that you might have.